I'm Gary Shapiro, and I'm the host of a radio program and podcast called From the Bookshelf that airs on a radio station in Santa Cruz, California, and also can be heard everywhere on the web. And normally I record my program at a recording studio talking to authors on the telephone from wherever they might be. But tonight we are sitting here in person in front of a live audience. It looks to me to be about maybe 5,000 people. Thank you all for coming. So let me introduce my guest. Ed Siegle is a native of Somerset. He's lived and worked in Spain and Latin America. And his novel, Invisibles, I'm holding it up for the radio audience to see as well, is set in England and in Brazil. And Ed Siegle is also the author of several short stories, and he's worked on a novel right now based on his experiences here tonight. So, Ed Siegle, welcome to From the Bookshelf.
Thank you very much.
So before we talk about Invisibles, tell us a little bit about yourself, although the majority of the thousands of people here are related to you.
Yes, so I am an aspiring writer. I'd say that because I don't write full-time, but obviously I've had this book published. I suppose I've been writing on and off for about 25 years, trying to get it published, and did so with this book about 5 years ago now, I guess. I grew up in this part of the world, moved away, and then came back again about 4 or 5 years ago. In between, one of the places I lived was Brighton, which is one of the reasons why part of the novel is set there. One of the other big things in my life is that I studied languages. Developed a love for it as a teenager, particularly Spanish. And because I spoke Spanish, a company then sent me to Brazil, which of course doesn't speak Spanish. But, I was the closest thing to someone who spoke Portuguese that they had, and ended up in the ridiculously fortunate pre-dot-com bubble bursting position of living in Brazil, in Rio, in Ipanema, much like one of the characters in the book. And unfortunately the bubble burst and I had to come home again, and when I came home to Brighton I had this very great feeling of what the Brazilians call saudades, which is this kind of almost painful longing for Brazil. So I thought, well, I should therefore write about what you know. I'll write a book about someone with a painful longing for Brazil who lives in Brighton, and so that's how it sort of came together.
So what do you do when you're not writing?
I try and keep that quiet as much as possible because people tend to
to
glaze over. I'm a business consultant, I work in telecoms. Do I need to?
No, glaze over.
That's the point, they glaze over normally.
And you're a parent as well?
I'm a parent, yes, I am a parent. I have 2 daughters who are 7 and 5.
Have they read the book?
They haven't yet. They have copies, but they haven't read it yet. And I have a stepson who is nearly 24, actually, which is quite relevant, I suppose, because before the time I wrote the book, I had started a relationship with one of those millions of people in the audience who was my wife, who had Sam as her son and was 8 at the time, and they came out to stay with me in Brazil. So I was going into a relationship where the idea of fatherhood and what it was to be a father, or actually not someone's father but in a position of a father, was quite important. So again, there was Brighton and Brazil in the book, and lots of stuff around
about father and sonness. Yeah. And I met your father. It was back there, and he's a very nice fellow. But what I was going to ask before I knew that your father was here, what your relationship with your father was like, and how that.
No, very good. Very, very good relationship.
Because there's a sort of one of the themes of Invisibles. And this is the problem or difficulty in talking with novelists about their work, because you don't want to give away the entire novel to the audience, because you want people to want to read the book. So I want to talk around the story of the novel.
Sure.
But maybe a good way to begin would be for you to tell us what you would want someone to know about the book before reading it.
What I would want someone to know about the book before reading it? That's a difficult question, that is. I think that they should know the locations of the book. I think are important. I mean, for me, location is very important as a writer. So, and I think it's something which is interesting about the novel. Those two settings, the fact that it's in Brighton and Brazil, and I think that fact that the book is about a quest. I like to write and I like to read books that are if not a page turner, but something that sort of draws you in. And I think that idea of the search that the main character has, Joel, for his father, sort of drives the book, and that's something. And the other thing I think about it, which is to do with the way that I like to write, is about it's to do with the characters, really. I find that my writing comes from the characters, so I don't start writing a book with the idea of what the ending's going to be. I hope to try and find a voice for the characters, and I think there are a couple of characters in the book, personally, and from the very few people that have read it, the ones that they've seen a reaction to, most of them in this room, the character of Jackie and the character of Nelson, I think is the voice of those characters, almost more than Joel, who it's all about, really, are important to the book. So I think those things, the location, the sort of that thrust of the quest, and the sort of characters, I think, are what characterises the book for me.
Well, I noticed on Amazon UK there are quite a few positive reviews, and now I see you come from a large family, so...
Yeah. Sense in those reviews.
So it makes sense. But I remember, I was thinking about this as I was reading your book. When I was a kid, we used to go to the movies, and we didn't check, like now, to see what time the movie starts. We just go, and the movie would be playing. And then the movie would end, and then there would be the thing in between the previews and the cartoon and stuff. And then the next movie would play, and then the movie you came in on would play again, and you got to the spot where you came in, you go, oh, here's where we came in. And then you would leave. Is that familiar to some people?
Yeah.
And I kind of felt that way with your book. Why did you start your book where you started? You don't exactly start, because you start the story kind of, there's as much that happens before the point in the book where it begins as there is after.
Yeah, I think that I started there because I was very drawn to that particular episode. One of the things that sort of fed into the story that I developed was seeing the film Bus 174, which is directed by a director called José Padilla, which is a documentary about an incident that happened in Brazil in 2000, where a guy growing up on the streets hijacked a bus, and there was a siege which was on national television in Brazil. It was watched by about 30 million people, and it sort of unfolded through the course of the day. So it's a very, very dramatic incident. So, and that is something that's woven through the book, and it has an important sort of connection to the theme of the book, or to the title of the book. And so, it felt like a very good dramatic place to start, really, and then to go back in time to all the stuff that happens in the 60s and 70s, but start it in the modern day with that incident.
It's interesting. Most novels do not have a bibliography at the end. Stuff. Yours has books and films that influenced you, including this film that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
But maybe this would be a perfect moment for you to read that little part. I asked you to just.
Okay.
There's a little part of the book. The book is called Invisibles, and I guess here's why.
Okay. So just to introduce it, so there's a character in this book called Nelson, who is a sort of down and out character who's sort of grown up in a favela, which is like a shanty town, and he's been down on his luck, and he manages to break into this house. People go away, and he's a musician, and he finds a room in this amazing music room in the house, which has these windows which look out over Rio and over these favelas all surrounding this area. So, and he's sitting there, and he's found a wonderful guitar in this room, and he starts to play this guitar sitting in this room. As he felt the strings fall in with his fingers' caress, Nelson looked over the favela below and imagined he was inside an enormous eye, unblinking, surveying the world around which he had scrambled for 39 years. with varying colours of success. And as he gazed, it struck him that there was something impudent about a favela. He knew this wasn't a helpful thought, given that right at this moment, 1 million favelados were sweating as a squeegee boy, a maid, a whore, a pickpocket, a petrol pump attendant, a bus driver, a street sweeper, or simply standing with a dozen brothers in a prison cell meant for two. But a favela was created by hands carrying bricks and sheets of metal up towering slopes to build a home when the rest of the city wished they wouldn't. We're here, the favelas said, and there's nothing you can do. To make matters worse, many favelas had the cheek not to squat by the swamps on the fringes of the city, nor to sprawl on scrubland heading into nowhere, but to sit on the central hills that made Rio the marvellous city. And these hills were so beautiful that playboys in the South Zone had no choice but to look up and see the brick and concrete boxes which weren't going to vanish, no matter how much rich folk wished they would. He could see black kids in bright shorts kicking a ball, a fat woman heaving bags up twisting steps. Nelson wondered how God came to develop the intricate logic by which it was fine to sit on his celestial arse instead of helping. Still, he had to admit, it was better to be up there looking down than down there, up here looking down than down there looking up. Besides, Nelson couldn't help but feel a bit sorry for him. It must be hard to be around and amongst people all the time without anyone noticing. It was bad enough at Bar do Paulo when you didn't have a real and Zemané was nowhere to be seen. God didn't have a Zemané, he was the Zemané. But it was better to be the mortal one in a way, because he was right there before your eyes, bang slap in the middle of life. Immortal, invisible, lonely as hell, that was how Nelson perceived God. He smiled and wondered at his own intricate logic, by which it seemed better to be the bossy but generous owner of a bar than creator of the universe.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a fabulous passage. And it makes me, I had to read it about 5 times, because of course it said invisible, and that's the title of your story, and I'm still not sure exactly why it's the title of your story.
I think that there's a number of things that connect into the story. So from a social perspective, connecting into that incident with the bus hijack, os invisíveis, they're called in Brazil, are street children. They live in the parks by the sides of the road, and they are neglected and ignored, and they are invisible. And to make themselves seen, they juggle tennis balls at traffic lights, and they things like that, and they try and attract attention to get some money and things like that. So there's that level of social invisibility. The bus hijacker himself, arguably, what he was doing by making that stand on the bus with the world looking at him was turning himself from an invisible member of society into a visible member of society. And there's lots of references through the book to that social issue, in Brighton as well, to people on the street, and they're very peripheral to the story, just as they're quite peripheral in life. So that was one aspect of it. But I think also there's a personal connection in terms of Joel's quest, for understanding about his own personality, about himself. He has this father he doesn't really know, who he kind of idolises, even though he had an abusive relationship with his mother. And it's he's trying to understand himself, I suppose, and the hidden, invisible things about himself by looking for his father. So there's things like that. It seemed to connect to me to quite a few of the things that I was trying to bring out through the story.
Yeah, and brings me back to my question about your relationship with your father, and my relationship with my father. And I thought a lot about that. My father is not around anymore, and so my relationship with him is only in dreams. Where he's great, he's doing fine. But the idea that you have an idealized view of your parents, and maybe that it's better to have that idealized view than to have the real parents around.
That can be the case. Yeah. I have to say, I had a very good relationship with my father, and actually, it was interesting for me writing this book because my father was a dentist. And that it's not the most glamorous profession to give to characters in your novel. That wouldn't be what I'd be telling people before they read it.
It's all about
dentists, but Joel and his father both are dentists, and actually it was very interesting talking to my father about his experience of that profession and how it had changed over the years and you know and things like that. So actually that was quite an interesting thing. There's lots of that is in the book. So that, yeah, I mean, I suppose the fatherhood for me in the book more comes from my exploration of my relationship with my stepson. I was, not having been in that position before, I was very conscious when in the early part of my relationship that I very much wasn't his father, because, you know, even though I was there and I was in that role, you know, his dad was his dad and would always be his dad, sort of thing, and I don't wish to sort of go into or critique that relationship, but there is the sort of father is something you can't replicate in some visceral way, you know. But then what it is to actually, you know, be a father in terms of a role is a different question. So all of that stuff was quite new to me, quite interesting.
I thought that one of the reasons that your characters were dentists is because we associate them, pardon me, father, but we associate dentalness with pain.
Yeah. That's definitely a factor. I mean, and the fact that there is a particular episode in the story where that is character's kind of ultimate limit, really, and there are films in which this has happened as well, where they're evil. So there's something definitely you can play with there, and I think also the contrast between that and the white uniform, the pristine sort of facade of a dentist, and actually it was a sort of a way of seeing the deterioration of the character Gilberto, the father of Joel, when in the book, is that as things happen to him and he has bad experiences, he becomes a worse dentist, and he starts drinking and his hands shake and he starts inflicting pain. So it was a useful vehicle in other ways as well.
Yeah. So do you think that as a writer, that it's possible that you put subtext in a novel that you weren't aware that you put there?
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
I'm sure it is.
And does that mean that it's not really there, or just that you need the readers to see it?
I mean, there's things that you intend. There's things that you're feeling for yourself that you maybe can't quite express, and then there's things, I suppose, that people see in it that you don't see, and I think all of that is fine. I'm happy for those things to be identified. And
I was wondering, in that passage that you read, and we had a little brief conversation earlier in which you were talking about slow going in your new novel. Are you the kind of writer that it spills out, or do you, and then you go back, or are you like, oh, it's got to be, this word has to be the right word, and you stop until you have that word?
No, I definitely spill out and go back. I mean, when I was writing this book, I got into a regular thing of making myself, I would write every day, and I had to write 500 words a day. I wouldn't do anything else until I'd done it. I wrote quite a lot on the train when I was commuting to London. I wouldn't let read the sports pages or whatever I normally do until I'd done it, so there was that, but I knew where it was going, but the joy of it for me is to, I want to write a bit of this scene, but I haven't got it all mapped out, and I'm not looking for exactly the right word, and then, but I'm happy I've created something, and then I'll come back and edit,
So there are a slew of characters, and they weave back and forth.
Yeah.
And did they, although you know where your story is going, did those characters surprise you from time to time in the things they said or did?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I didn't have that all mapped out. So I had a really good feeling for Nelson. I had a really good feeling for Jackie. I think I felt, and I knew what they would. I almost felt like in the end I could put them in any situation, and they would say something, and I wouldn't, and that would be in a way a surprise, because you created it, but at the same time it's consistent. It felt like it was them. So.
Invisibles is your first published novel, but
It is.
You've written other novels. Your father told me this one was better than the other one.
Yeah, and he's right. He's right. And you know, my publisher, for whom I'm writing the other one, you know, one of the things they suggested, well, you know, what about that one? You know, while you're writing that one idea would be to publish that one. And there's two reasons why I wouldn't want to do that. One is, I don't think it's as interesting to me to do something that's a past exercise as writing a new one. But if it was just there and it could just be published, I don't think it's as good, and it doesn't represent me as I am as a writer now. I wrote it when I was younger and different time in my life, and I think the story it has is a good story, and in a way maybe I could rewrite that story, but again, it's more interesting to write a story I haven't written than one I have.
Do you have a zillion stories that are rattling around in your head and it's just going to take the time for you to get them all out?
I've got a few, definitely. Yeah, I have. But the main focus is this one that's been written.
The one you're working on
now?
now?
The one I'm working on now.
And can you want to tell us anything about it?
So that is set in this part of the world, so like I say, the location is very important. So
just don't ask Siri where we are, but where
yeah, well, I grew up with some of the thousands of people here in a village called Ash, a few miles from here, and then latterly lived around here. My parents lived in Stoke, where Siri thinks we are. So this part of the world around here, around Ham Hill, and particularly also the levels, the Somerset levels. I think that sort of area of wetlands, and to me I think is a very sort of interesting location for a novel. So it's sort of that's the setting, and it's another sort of family story. It's about someone who goes through a box of possessions of their mother after they've died, and finds out some things they didn't know about the family, and then they sort of goes from there and discover all sorts of things.
When you're writing about Ipanema, which has a certain, as soon as you say it, you think of the girl from Ipanema.
Yeah.
And there's a whole kind of mythology that goes with it, and we've seen films set there. But on the other hand, Somerset, that's a much more unique place, although you're all familiar with it here. Probably you would have to do a lot more describing it, creating it.
I think so. That's right. And it's like you say, it's maybe a tougher sell than from that point of view in some ways, but. Got to describe that. The things I find magical about that particular landscape, and the things that I love about this part of the world, which is very dear to me, are I have to try and bring those things out, and again, it'll be the characters as well that will bring it along. Hopefully.
Right, sure. When you were talking about coming back here and having that longing to go back to Brazil, when you were in Brazil, did you long for Somerset?
Yes, well, yeah, I did. Yeah, I did. I mean, my parents lived here, like I say, for a long time, and then they moved away, and that was what triggered me moving here in some ways, because I felt a sense of loss about having a home here. I could always come and visit them, but suddenly I couldn't. So. I did. I mean, I would still would love to go back and be paid to live in Ipanema.
And you definitely got into not only the appeal, the modern day appeal, but you really got into and your story is set in the 1960s, part of it is set in the 1960s, and that whole magical era in which that music unfolded for the world.
Yeah. I mean, that was really. I mean, I think. It's very. I think you almost can't write about Brazil today without writing about its past. I mean, the last 40 years, 50 years of history of Brazil are sort of, amazingly dramatic. I mean, to have been, through dictatorships and those shadows have not gone away with, what's happened now with the impeachment and things like that. So, I mean, the sort of political history of Brazil in that period is fascinating, and so it's a really interesting environment to set a story. I mean, if you think about the 60s in England was musically interesting, and obviously, and America, and there was a bit of controversy and rubbing up against the establishment, and they nearly locked the Stones up and all this kind of thing. But in Brazil, they tortured them. killed them, and there were tanks on the streets, and so the sort of tropicalia, the sort of avant-garde musical and artistic movement that there was not just rebelling against sort of stodgy 50s parents or whatever. It was a real revolution against dictatorship, political rebellion, and the bravery involved in doing that was extreme. So interesting politically, interesting musically, past and present Brazil. I think as a person not necessarily very well educated from a musical point of view, I think there's and perhaps I'm generalising, but I think there's a tendency to kind of think the last 50 years of music revolve around the Anglo world, and we had the 60s, and we had Elvis, and we had the Stones and the Beatles, and then we had punk, and even rave and house music and all these kind of things. Then you go to Brazil, and they have equivalents that we know nothing about, as they also have our music, and the folk tradition is so strong, and there are so many genres of music and so much going on, and not as sort of outdated forms of music, but they're still very much alive. Some of forró is a form of folk music which is danced to by young people in clubs every weekend. So I'm veering away from the 60s, but that whole the musical culture in the 60s, but also in present day is so rich that I wanted to bring that in.
Yeah. Well, since we have an audience of thousands, I want to throw it open to them. Does anybody here have any questions for Ed Siegle?
I've got a question.
Good.
So, Ed,
yes.
when you to take yourself back to Brazil, to
Yes.
write about Brazil, do you have to listen to Brazilian music? Do you eat Brazilian food? Do you smell ingredient? Or do you just close your eyes?
So when I was writing it, and I wasn't there, yes, I did. I mean, I listened to Brazilian music and read Brazilian books, and looked at a lot of stuff on the internet. The great thing, I suppose, these days about email on the internet is that you can do things that you couldn't do before. So you could go on, even when I wrote this a few years ago, you could go on Street View, and you could ride the bonji, the tram, through the streets of Santa Teresa where this takes place, and check that from this corner you can actually see the statue of Christ, that you haven't got that wrong, and I emailed the chef in Cafeteria Colombia, which is one of this amazing sort of Belle Epoque sort of restaurants in downtown Rio, and asked him what they should serve on the buffet on a Friday, and he corresponded, that sort of thing. You could check, and actually that was all part of keeping it alive and doing that research, and was enjoyable because it was keeping my connection. I certainly did as much as I could, really. Drank a lot of caipirinhas. There are, I think, I can't remember how many references it is now, but there was certainly, I think it's 23 references to caipirinhas in my book, something like that. And there was a point where the copy editor came back to me and said, I'm not sure we needed 24. It's a very nice drink.
Well, so not only can you do that kind of research, but you sort of have to, because if you don't, one of your readers will.
That's true. That's right.
You have a
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. So you've got to get it right. But I suppose there's no excuses.
That's right. Yeah. Everybody's watching. Yes, young lady.
So did you learn the language?
I did. Yes, I did. I learned Spanish when I grew up, and I used to go to Spain and go on Spanish exchanges and did study Spanish at university, and that was a big love of my life. And when I went to Brazil, like I said, I didn't speak Portuguese, but I think languages is something if I have any kind of aptitudes, it's one I have reasonably well, and I immerse myself by making big sacrifices, like going out to Lapa and going to watch lots of music with people and drink lots of caipirinhas. And I think it helps in places like Brazil, and I found this in Spain as well, are very helpful because they want to draw you in, they want to take you out, they want to look after you, they want to show you the time, they like you liking their country, and they're very warm people. So, you get the chance to practice a lot. So yes, I did. I mean, I can speak. It's been 15 years, but I can still speak a bit.
I'm just learning to speak English, but how many languages do you speak? How many languages do you have?
So I speak pretty good Spanish, Portuguese from there, French I'm supposed to speak, but I didn't spend a lot of time in France, so my education was more around like, can you translate this piece of Balzac into English or something? So I have kind of textbook French, but I'm not very confident in it. So.
You don't think you could go order in a restaurant?
I could do that, but I wouldn't be able to swear very well, or I wouldn't be able to joke, whereas in Brazilian or in Spanish, I kind of I've learnt it more by communicating rather than in
being able
Spanish.
to tell a joke is the key.
Yeah. Don't ask me to tell a joke.
Ed, I just wondered, does the storytelling come first? Or could you have used your interest involved in the context and the material you've got? Could almost have been an autobiographical, story from a factual story, rather than using it as a context for the imaginary.
Yeah, I think to me the story is really important. I'm more interested in it being more of a story, and I'm more interested in I think it comes back to what I said about the characters. I think in terms of, for me it was interesting writing Nelson, and it was interesting writing Jackie. I'm not someone in their 50s who's a woman who is single and living in Brighton. I'm not a black down and out guy who lives in favelas in Brazil. So to find a voice for those characters was something which was sort of very challenging and appealing to me, and that having that rather than actually I found the to write Joel's story, someone longing to go back to Brazil who was my age. I find that quite difficult because I find it difficult to get away from my own voice, and I don't really want to write that so much. So I definitely veer towards the story rather than the autobiography, I think. Although again, it's so much of it is around stuff you've experienced, and like I said, next book's around here, but hopefully it's not about me.
So you're sort of an actor then, who's playing the parts of Jackie and Nelson.
I think so, yeah, I think that's right. It's about getting character for those writers, for those characters. Yeah, I think so. I think that's what I find that interesting when I'm writing, yeah.
Mrs. Brown, another question?
To what extent did you go deep into the favelas as part of your research, and how did that feel?
I didn't.
You did?
No, I didn't. You could when I was there. You can probably a lot more now on favela tours, but you can't go. You usually can't go. I mean, it's actually dangerous in some places to walk near favelas. If you're looking, I had some friends who went, and you can walk along the beach of Leblon, and you can walk around the corner, but there's one bit you can't, because it's quite close to the favela, and they went there with a camera and a rod. But a lot of Rio is very, very safe and wonderful, but there is a line you can't really cross with that. Now that may be getting better, and one day may not be there, but you can't just go in. I have friends. I have a friend who's a filmmaker, a documentary maker who lives in Rio, and she grew up in that area, and she goes in there all the time. She's Brazilian, she's in there all the time making films. She knows people. She knows exactly what she's doing. So, she's fine. She knows what she can and can't do, and she can go there freely. But I would stick out so much like a sore thumb that I would just be asking for trouble, I think, and I might get away with it. It would be dangerous to try and do this.
And were your characters fully formed from the outset of the novel, or did they develop, and then when you went back through and sort of edited, did it change sort of the journey you took from it?
They were. I think that voice was there from fairly early on, but it definitely developed a bit as I went with them, because I suppose I'm building their history and I'm building their. Once they've said something, they've used a particular phrase, that then becomes part of their sort of kind of personality in some ways, a reflection of their personality. But I definitely had a feeling for them from the beginning, which was stayed fairly consistent. And I suppose I went back and edited, and I would have found things that, that doesn't sound quite right, or change stuff, about them, when I came back. But but not a massive amount. I didn't do a massive amount of rewriting the characters. I did a lot of rewriting Joel, the protagonist, because I was constantly trying to find him without it being me, or so that was more challenging, I think.
It's harder to play a character that's like yourself without doing it.
I think so. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Now, it's just interesting coming back to the discussion you both had about place and its importance. You used the example of Brazil and Brighton and Handmill and the levels. Do you think we all have inside us a sort of innate feeling for places that are important to us? So you can sort of relate to that level that there are important places, but you have to then build up the background and the context for those places. And so we just attach our own places to this. I just wonder what the interaction is between those.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting question. I mean, I think that, I don't know. But it's interesting that there's nothing really intrinsically fantastic about this particular part of the world beyond, somewhere 100 miles down the road, I'm sure, And yet, to me, it has things about it which are particularly draw me to it, whether that's just nostalgia or whether it's particular qualities that I sort of have perceived that other people don't. I don't know, I'm not quite sure.
I was thinking about the nostalgia, particularly, we have those places wherever we were, and you could relate that to another place.
Yes.
You could just trigger that
Yes.
sort of context, really.
Yeah.
And when you're writing, how much do you think about the people that are reading your book? I mean, why do you write? Do you write because you have a burning artistic desire to put stuff down on paper, or do you want to make shed loads of money? So when you're writing, you think, oh God, I better put in a sex scene because that'll sell the book. Do you think like that, or do you actually never consider your audience?
No, I do consider my audience, yes, obviously my vast audience, but I do consider my audience, and there's certain things I want there to be in the book that I hope people will like, so I want it to be a book that has a plot which makes you want to kind of, move on through it and not just sort of navel gaze too much. At the same time, I would like it to have some ideas in it which are sort of, thought-provoking or, sort of express the world and things about it that I see that I hope will be interesting to people. So I am thinking of that, and I am trying to make it interesting and have colour in it and character in it and those things. So I definitely am thinking about the reader, but I'm not trying to hit a particular force it into a particular pigeonhole, I suppose. Within those constraints, then I want to write the story that I want to write.
I think Ed is being slightly modest, in that I think that Invisibles is meant to, it's a piece of propaganda in a sense, that is, Ed wants you to change your way of thinking, and he wants to open your eyes to a part of the world, a population in the world that needs our attention, and that this is an important work of art. And so I do think driven artistically is a big part of what he's doing, and I think that there's a motivation to get that word forth, and he does a really wonderful job. The book is Invisibles. The author is Ed Siegle. Thanks so much for being on From the Bookshelf.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.